Hey everyone. You know, I did a video on the job yesterday, not yesterday, but on the job basically late last year, around last year, I believe, where, and I've talked about this in text as well, of what is the lustful milk gag? What is it? And I talked about it several times, but I'm sure a lot of people are still wondering, well, what's so important about this gag? Why is this lustful milk gag used? How did it come to be? What's the point of it? Well, that's what that thing is. What is the lustful milk gag? That question came into be. But why is the lustful milk gag around? Why does it exist? Well, I'll tell you why. I'm going to answer that here. You see, the lustful milk gag exists as a metaphor, if you will, as a visual metaphor. Let me give you an example. About 20 something years about 20 something years ago, about 20 years ago, a little over that, there was a CBS sitcom called Major Dad. Now, a few episodes in, the main character, the Major Dad, and his fiancée were on a getaway together. Not a honeymoon, but a getaway. And as they snuggled up in bed, now don't worry, there was nothing shown. This is CBS. They wouldn't go that far. They were fully clothed. And everything. But as they kissed and snuggled up in bed a little bit, the fiancée declared that she was melting. Yeah, the Major Dad's fiancée, his love interest, was declared that she was basically said that she was melting. Now, here's the thing. Had this been done in animated form, there is no doubt you'd probably see her slowly start to melt. You kind of see like a little pool being formed and everything because she's melting. But then she would quickly reform because some kind of, I don't know what it was in the episode, some kind of device or some kind of thing disrupted their incoming passion, if you get my drift. Anyway, if it was done in animated form, then there's no doubt that there's a possibility that the animators would have had like a little pool start to form under her, and you kind of see her, you'd probably start seeing her drip a little bit or sag a little bit on the back before she would reform because of the disturbance. Now, however, because that was done in live action, it never occurred. It never happened. But animation wise, and if not comic book wise, it does. You see, this is why it exists. This is why the lustful milk gag exists. To visually be a metaphor and represent how a character really feels. Nowadays, if you have an animated show, nowadays, or at least in the past few years, if you have an animated show that features humans as the main characters, but you want to represent how maybe one character feels with this gag, then the most logical step is to turn him into water. I'm not kidding. There is an episode of the Canadian series Groove High, which was aired here in the US on Cartoon Network. Groove High, I think it's a few episodes in, where the main character Tom disguises himself very cleverly, I should say, easy for me to say, but very cleverly, as another character named Dom, basically an alter ego. Because there's an indication that Tom and his bandmate because I think her name's Zoe, I believe. I think her name's Zoe or something. But his bandmate have a thing for each other. That there might be more there than just friendship. Basically, long story short, as he disguises himself as Dom, as he disguises himself as Dom, he sees his friend. He sees his friend, and I think I'm trying to make sure I know the kid. Yeah, Zoe. Her name's actually Zoe, but it's Zoe. He sees her, and basically to put his because he to basically prove that he can even fool her, if you will, he can even fool her into not recognizing him under the disguise. He compliments her, flirts with her a little bit, and then she suddenly melts and she suddenly turns all watery and melts and falls right into a puddle of water. Basically what happens is after he compliments her, she turns into basically like she basically her whole body turns all watery and then collapses into a puddle of water with just her eyes closed. Yeah, her eyes closed, and she turns into water and then collapses into the puddle of water, basically melting into a puddle, basically melting into a puddle, and her eyes are closed. And then of course she reforms. But I know that sounded confusing, but that's basically how cartoons these days, or people these days, do the lustful milk gag in an animated cartoon with human characters. Well, mostly with shows like Groove High. Other shows may not go in that direction that much. Captain Flamingo didn't really go in that direction that much because there's an episode where he and his friend Elizabeth are trying to help another friend, get the attention of another female character, and so Flamingo uses a device he creates. It's kind of a voice synthesizer, basically a voice disguiser, if you will. And he says, "Go." He tells his friend, "Go ahead, test it on Elizabeth, see what happens." So he does. He tests this out. He basically uses what's known as the super suave mode, and it basically causes the friend Elizabeth to melt into a puddle with only her ponytail sticking out and slowly sticking out of the puddle. And basically, she's kind of spreading, and as the puddle, she's spreading out a little bit, kind of flowing, side to side, kind of downhill a little bit, and her ponytails are separating, aiding in the puddle because, basically she's a puddle now. Now she does reform, but we don't see how she reforms. See, that's the thing there. And then there's another one. I can't think of it right now. I have it somewhere. Let me look online here. But there's another one. It's also out of Canada. But basically, this character, she gets complimented and she melts as well, but she doesn't melt completely. She kind of melts down, like as it's described in TV tropes, like wax, to where it's like a majority of her body's melted down, but you see her legs sticking out kind of awkwardly, and you kind of see her head sticking out, and it's still kind of flowing down. Basically, and she melts like wax to the floor, as it puts it. She's still, and you see her afterwards, she's still slowly melting down more. Let's see, Sidekick. That's the episode. That's the show's Sidekick. the character's named Vanna, and basically describes that she melts like wax. Basically, she melts into a puddle, but you kind of see her still in the process of melting on the floor because, like I said, her legs are awkward and everything, and her she's still melting down a little bit. Now, again, this is now again, um, this is used again, like I said, the lustful milk gang. The reason why it exists is, like I said, it's a metaphor. Now, there are other indications, like you know, that kind of get mistaken a little bit. Like in in the Flipper cartoon, they did have a Flipper cartoon, and I think it was out of another country. You have one of the main antagonists get fooled by another character, the female antagonist, who basically is like ugly or something. I'm not. It's depicted as ugly or not attractive, disguises herself as being an attractive jellyfish or something. And he basically, according to the thing, does a lustful milk egg as well. But all he does is like kind of does the wave. It's like his body goes from side to side, but we don't see him melt. That's not a lustful milk egg. Let me correct that. That's not a lustful milk egg. That's not a lustful milk trope or anything. That's just like a deflation, if you will. Same with the episode of The Mask at the end. You have this character called Kaboom, and the mask basically strips her of her. I know it sounds weird, right? Basically strips her of her outfit, and you don't see it, but you see. But apparently, the two cops, the two antagonist cops, if you will, that are always after the mask, see her boobies, and yeah, they do, but they don't. You don't see it. It's done where you see her back, but you don't see her front. And basically, they do a lustful milk egg as well, but it's not a lustful milk egg. It's a deflation. It's what it's called. It's called a lustful deflation. Okay, that's the big difference. A lustful milk egg, in the terms of cartoons, is basically where a character melts into a puddle. No matter if it's a full meltdown, complete meltdown, it's a partial meltdown, or whatever, it happens. Now, some might say, well, how can that be? Well, when when the characters do it like that, and to do the body waving back and forth, that's like a deflation. That's like a balloon deflating. Okay, that's like a balloon deflating. So it's nothing. It's nothing on that situation. So it's basically not in that same category. A lustful milk egg is when a character completely melts, either completely melts as a puddle or melts down into a puddle into a partial puddle where like let's say with that Vanna character, when you see them, they're still in the process of melting, although they don't completely melt, the rest of the way. But that's what it is. Another good example of this is one of the early interpretations being Swooner Crooner. In that, and that's a Porky Pig cartoon. But in that cartoon, you have this Frank Sinatra like rooster swooning all the hens. And there's one hen, she's a black and brown hen, if you will. She gets swooned to the point that she melts into a rippling puddle. Yeah, she melts into a rippling puddle with a little red frills left on top, but she melts into a rippling puddle. And she's only reformed when a Bing Cosby-like bird or rooster, or whatever, pigeon, comes and basically competes or starts competing with the Frank Sinatra one. Another indication would be the Plain Daffy cartoon. When the Mata Hari kisses Daffy, he melts into basically a complete liquid, sort of like a flat piano, flatwise, if you will, but it's basically he melts into a puddle, and even though you see him, it looks like he got hit by ran over by a piano or something, or a steamroller, and he's going down the stairs. basically he goes down into the cracks, but he only reforms when the Mata Hari, he quickly kind of reforms himself, kind of rewinds himself, if you will, to stop the Mata Hari from getting the secrets, if you know what I mean, or any kind of military secrets. Another indication, in my opinion, a perfectly good one, is Polly Voo Woos, which is a Popeye cartoon from 1956. Now, this is one of the more tunier ones because it seemed that no matter what happened, no matter what got said, it occurred. You know, when at the beginning, when this international television character is telling Olive and all the other ladies watching that their eyes are like limpid pools, her eyes turn into limpid pools. So you kind of get the gist of where this is going. Anyway, at the end of it, after after Bluto is revealed to be a fake international, because Olive, because here's the catch of this: it's announced at the end of the program that Olive is watching that the international could show up at any time that night at their house to take him out on a date. So Bluto overhears this outside of Olive's house, takes advantage of it. Like I said, Bluto sees this, takes advantage of it, and almost fools. But like I said, almost ends up fooling Olive and Popeye until Popeye eats his spinach during a sword fight and ends up revealing him to be the fake. Because I think Popeye pretty much kind of figured out at the end that something's not right here. Something seems a little too familiar. So anyway, long story short, Popeye ends up eating another can of spinach. After Olive compliments how wonderful he is, he ends up eating another can of spinach. He ends up becoming an international-like guy himself, kisses Olive on the hand, she turns all red, steam comes out of her ears, and then she says she feels like butter in his hands, and as she says this, she's melting into a pool of butter. She's melting into a pool of butter to the point that after she's completely melted, all you see is her smiling face on the top of the puddle, and it's just flowing down the floor with little dry spots appearing at the beginning of the puddle and at the end of the puddle. Even one that, as you get closer to the cartoon fading to black, one dry spot that's close to her eyes, if you will. But yeah, she completely melts down into a pool of butter that flows down the floor to end the cartoon. Now, the more useful version of this gag came, believe it or not, in Tiny Toons and Animaniacs. You had Buster do it, basically, in the Looney Beginning, the pilot episode for Tiny Toons, after getting kissed by Babs, who disguised her, who kind of giving Buster an example of what she can do, kind of impersonate and all that, after Babs kind of impersonates Jessica Rabbit, if you will. He ends up doing it, so he ends up being the first in the show, but female-wise, Babs is the first, and she does it at the most awkward time, and this, even for me, kind of gets me. Now, I don't know if this is a version of the Lustful Milk Gag that's basically out of admiration, which I guess it is, but after she sees the Tiny Toon characterizations of Prince Charles and the late Princess Diana, she compliments something about royalty, and she ends up melting into a pink puddle. And she remains that way even after her friends run through her. Yeah, her friends end up running through her. You see, what happens is, like I said, she ends up melting into a complete pink puddle, and then after that, her friends follow suit after the royal couple, and as they're following suit after the royal couple, they end up running through her, and you see like little spots of her splatting everywhere, until after her friends are so far away, she ends up reforming back into herself. Now, she does this again in the final Tiny Toons episode, which is the Christmas special, well, at least one of the final ones. The final one, actually, when one thinks about it, is Night Ghoulery, and even before that, the Spring Break one. So the Chris for my guess, for my regular episodic wise, Wonderful Tiny Toon Christmas is the last episode. But anyway, she ends up melting into a puddle right through her clothes to the point that as she becomes a puddle, like I said, she melts right through her clothes, and all that's and it's all that's left of her after she melts into a puddle is her clothes on top of her puddle form and her eyes falling down and landing on top of a puddle form as well. Yeah, she melts at the end of the Christmas one after Buster gives her his Christmas gift to her, which is a kiss. She ends up melting into a puddle, melts right through her clothes. Her clothes fall on top of her puddle form, and her eyes fall on top as well. So she ends up doing it. Now, of course, you have other characters as well. Plucky's done it about twice. He's done it in the Acme Bowl. He's done it in Pluck Tracy. So he's done it. But I'll get to those reasonings in a minute, or at least the Acme Bowl one. So Tiny Toons actually revived it in a sense. Now I don't know if any other show before that revived it, but Tiny Toons revived it. And then Animaniacs took it upon themselves to do it even more. In one of the first episodes of shorts called Space Probe, Dot is kind of abducted. Well, her and her brothers are already abducted, but is taken by some aliens to another portion of the spaceship with a machine that projects the person's thoughts onto the screen. So they project Dot's thoughts onto the screen, and when Dot suggests, "Hey, this is pretty cool. How about this thought?" And all of a sudden, you see looks like a muscle-bound or buffed-up Mel Gibson-like character on the screen that she's hugging. She ends up melting into a puddle. She ends up and here's what's funny though: she ends up steaming a little bit as she's melting, and she melts into a white puddle with only her ears flopped it, with only her ears remaining, and her flower that goes between her ears remaining on top, and the little a machine that they put on her head falls down on her, and then the aliens have to lift it up to see because they're pretty much confused, going like, "What did we do? Did we kill her or something like that?" So they have to lift up that little helmet, and then that's how she reforms. But of course, the most noted one out of this all is Minerva Mink. Now, Minerva, well, she's not alone in this. She's not alone in this. In the first one, which was Moon over Minerva, in her first one, which is Moon over Minerva, which production wise is actually the second one, but air wise, broadcast wise, is the first one. The nerdy geek called Wilford, he ends up melting into a puddle after she flirts with him a little bit, or teasingly flirts with him. And he melts completely into a puddle, and all that's left on the puddle is his head, and he's still able to talk. But when she does it after encountering his werewolf alter ego, yeah, because Wilford's a werewolf, we find this out later, she ends up melting into a complete puddle to the point that she doesn't talk. She doesn't talk at all. She ends up basically being a complete puddle to the point that Wilford, in his alter ego, has to pick her up like a wet towel and wring her out just to restore her. Yeah. Basically, she melts into such a complete puddle, a kind of creamy multicolored puddle, if you will, that Wilford, in his alter ego, has to pick her up, wring her out like a towel, just to restore her. Now this goes back to something similar that Plucky did in the Acme Bowl episode of Tiny Toons. You see, after being fondled or seduced by an attractive perfecto prep female, in a hot tub, if you will. Yeah, they do a hot tub scene here with them showing with the Perfecto Prep guys showing Plucky the benefits of being at the what being part of the school would be, or basically the benefits or what benefits he would get being part of the school. And after being teasingly flirted or fondled with by this attractive Perfecto Prep female, he ends up melting into a green puddle in the hot tub, and is only reformed when Roddy, which is the main leader of the Perfecto Prep School, scoops him up in a cup and pours him out. Yeah, because the next time we see him as in that puddle form, we only see his eyes on the puddle, and he's just like kind of on top of the hot tub, just like he's a part of it. And like I said, the Roddy character has to pull him up with reform him by scooping him up in a cup and pouring him out. And that's a portion of the Lustful Milk gag that I call a permanent lustful melt. Let me explain. Like I said, that this is what I call a permanent lustful melt. The lustful melt gag, or a permanent lustful melt, a PML, if you will, a permanent lustful melt. And basically, what that is where a character, like let's say Minerva in Moon Over Minerva and Plucky in Acme Bowl, melt into such a complete puddle that it takes somebody else to reform them. You know, I even joked about this one time when I was doing a because they used to have Wikipedia used to have an individual page based on cartoon characters, and one they had an individual page on Minerva, and I added to that page age or something. I think I may have added to that page. I'm not really sure. That the character, the Wilford character, even in his werewolf form, could have walked off and went and saw a movie, went and got something to eat for the next 2 hours, and came back, and Minerva would still be in her melted state. Yeah, that's basically it. She would have still been in her melted state. Same with Plucky. Those guys could have left him, gone and planned, got ready, got themselves, well, basically they could have gone, that, like I said, that's the same with Plucky. Those Perfecto Prep characters, they could have left, started doing some planning for the game against Acme Lou, and they could have came back maybe a few hours later, and Plucky would still be in that hot tub as a green puddle with just eyes on top of him, on top of it. That's basically what you call the PML, the permanent lustful milk gag. Now, I don't know of any other examples of it out there, but it is there. Now, other shows have done this throughout the years, throughout the 90s and the 2000s. Casper's animated series did this with Casper in the cartoon short Pearl Jammed, if you will. They did this with Casper there because Pearl was kind of seducing him into helping her learn to be scary, and there you go. You've had this as an example. I'll give you another example. They use this because I'm surprised they don't bring this up at Bonkers, because Bonkers did this one time in Ski Patrol. I'm sure somebody listening will add that to TV tropes. So they've used this gag throughout. They used it in the Quack Pack episode, Heavy Dental with Huey, where he's melted into a steaming puddle of water when he sees Agent X, who he doesn't know is a gyroid android at the time. Let's see. Let me check here. Hold on. They used it there. They used it in Droopy Master Detective with the character. Let me see if I get this right. with the character Rumpley in the Screwball Squirrel short called A Screwball Romance when he sees a cute poodle named Fifi. They do this in Spliced to Patricia when she sees Eduardo during the Amazon episode. They do this to Felix not once but twice in the Twisted Tales of Phoenix the cat. They do this to Rocco in Rocco's Modern Life in the episode Swack. They do this in Ed, Ed, and Eddie to both Eddie and Kevin in Pop Goes the Ed when they see Nas in her bikini. They do this in the Fractured episode of Teen Titans where Larry, which is basically like a Batmite version of Robin, does this after getting a hug from Starfire. It also goes as far as to say Charlie Horse in the Bob Clampett cartoon is a grand old nag after he after he gets a kiss from his Hollywood crush Hedy La Mare because he saved her from a fire. It happens in the wacky world of Tex Avery in the Pow Pooch segment, PP Loves Fifi, where he ends up melting. So there's a lot out there. They even do it in movies. As a matter of fact, it happens to the animated Lizzy in the Lizzy McGuire movie. And it happens in comic strips to the character Nimi in her comic strip ends up doing it while watching Khal Drogo on television. I think they should also add in comic strips if they want to add it in. It does happen sort of to Minerva Mink in one of her comic book stories where she's shopping at the mall and she ends up doing it there as well. But it's like her neck's the only thing, her head and neck are the only ones remaining after she completely melts a little bit, and she's asking, is it haunted here, or is it just the guy she sees? So the gag is that's basically examples of where the gag's been used, and basically the reason why the gag exists, why the lustful milk gag or trope exists. It exists because of the fact that it's a metaphor, it's a visual metaphor for how certain characters feel. Like I said, you go back to Major Dad when his fiance love interest said that she was melting. If that was done in animated form, she would have melted. You would have started seeing her start to pool, a little pool start to develop, and she would you kind of see her kind of start to slowly drip a little bit, or kind of start running a little bit before that disturbance or something. So basically, that's why the lustful milk gag exists in media today. It's to visually represent how a character is feeling, how a character feels attractive-wise to another. Now, yes, just because I know someone might bring this up. Now, yes, the female characters are always the ones that are mostly used for this. And I completely understand that. But the male characters have had their fair share as well. Now, there's even an old cartoon of Popeye where he ends up, I don't know if it's a Cinderella parody or what, and when Olive sees him, she ends up kissing him, and he ends up melting into a red puddle through his armored suit. Basically, he's wearing a knight's armor, and when she kisses him, he ends up melting. So again, the male characters have had their fair share as well, but it seems that the female ones are always the ones that end up doing it mostly. And I guess according to TV Tropes, this is why. This is what TV Tropes says at the beginning of their article of it, and I quote, it says, it's a fairly common staple of Western animation. This trope involves a character being so enamored or attracted with another, the whole body turns into a puddle of goo. Can be used, pay attention to this, can be used as the female equivalent of something else rises. It is often seen and often is as seen in a lot of Warner Brothers 1990s cartoons like Animaniacs and Tiny Toons. Now, they do say that male characters can experience this too, but it's either used as a censor decoy. If the censors don't want implications of, erections or to be shown, or if the writer wants to move past metaphorically showing an erection or ejaculation and go straight to metaphorically showing an orgasm post coital come down. I know that's kind of sounded weird and disgusting. I do apologize. But that's basically what it says on the TV Tropes article. But you notice that they say after the top part, they say male characters can experience this too. But it's used as a censor decoy. But for female characters, it's used as the equivalent of something else rises. So yeah, basically they describe it mostly, according to TV Tropes, as something that's used to equivalent, basically, well, like I said, according to them, it basically is the equivalent of something else rises. That is why mostly a lot of the mostly, not saying all, but mostly a majority of the characters that use this are female characters in animation, if not in comics. And again, like I said, a male character can also experience this as well. They say that on TV Tropes, but it's basically as a censor decoy. So yeah, that's why the lustful milk gag exists. It's basically a metaphorical visual representation of how somebody feels being attracted to another. And according to TV Tropes, it's the female equivalent of something else rises. I don't know. And for males is a censor decoy for certain situations like I mentioned. But that's basically why the lustful milk gag exists. I know it doesn't make sense, and I do apologize if this audio video went a little too long, but that's why this thing exists. That's why it's here. I know some people may not feel like it makes a lot of sense. I know some people may feel like, why in the world would they even think about that? Why would they even come to that conclusion? What I mean, I know one question a lot of people have is, who came up with this idea? Who came up with the idea to visually represent a character melting into a puddle after they see another? Who came up with that idea? We may never know, but who came up with it, in my opinion, did the right thing. They did the right thing, because in live action and all that, you can't really see that. But animation and comic book wise, you can. So that's basically all I'm going to say on why the lustful milk gag exists. Let me know what you guys think down below. Again, I apologize if this went a long time. Comment if